Hey there. Tonight, we're not wandering through royal halls or in candlelit cathedrals. We're stepping into something grittier, a place where gold dust clings to your fingertips, your lungs sting with smoke, and your eyes blur from hours spent bent over molten metal. This is the story of what it was really like to be a goldsmith in the Middle Ages. So, before you get cozy under that warm blanket, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only if what I do here genuinely helps you wind down at night. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? There's something oddly soothing about knowing there are others awake with us, wandering through history together. Now, dim the lights. Light a candle if you have one, or just let the soft flicker of your screen and the steady hum of night wrap around you. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let's slip back 700 years to a world of fire, gold, and endless expectations in the life of a medieval goldsmith. You've just been born into a respected trade guild in medieval Europe. That's the good news. The bad news? That trade is goldsmithing, which sounds fancy, until you realize you're basically being handed a lifelong sentence to fire, fumes, and a future of chronic back pain. You don't remember much about being a child, but that's fine. No one in your family coddled you anyway. Your parents were too busy hammering coins, scraping filings off workshop floors, and praying no one dropped a crucible on their foot again. You've barely learned to walk, and already there's a tiny set of bellows with your name on it. Childhood. Cute idea. Doesn't exist here. Your toys are bits of slag. Your lullaby, the hiss of molten metal. See, in medieval times, if your father was a goldsmith, then congratulations. So are you. There's no career counseling, no gap year backpacking across the Alps, just the family trade, passed down like a slightly cursed heirloom. You belong to the guild, and the guild belongs to the city, and the city doesn't care if you scream when your fingertips get burned. Work is life. Life is work, and your life smells like hot copper and regret. By the age of 6, 7, if your family's the sentimental type, you're apprenticed. Not legally, of course. Nothing about this is really official until your name appears in a stained ledger no one can read. But the moment you can hold a file without chewing on it, you're in. You get handed to a master goldsmith, which sounds noble, until you realize this guy hasn't bathed since King Edward was young and has the temperament of a kicked donkey. He now owns your time, your labor, and occasionally your soul. The workshop is not a safe space. It's not even a clean space. You walk in and immediately inhale the smoky perfume of charcoal dust, acidic flux, and the ever so subtle stench of burning fingernails. There's no ventilation. Why would there be? Windows are expensive. You learn fast that gold doesn't shine until it's been tortured. Just like you. The floor is a tapestry of scorched wood, stray nails, and sharp filings. There are crucibles balanced on tripods that look like they were designed by someone who hated stability. Open flames dance on every surface like fire sprites out for blood. The walls are lined with iron tools whose purpose you don't yet understand, but you'll come to fear. And then there's the anvil, your new best friend and worst enemy. It's heavy, unyielding, and always one careless swing away from breaking your fingers. Your first real task? Sweeping. Constantly. But not just to clean. Goldsmiths are obsessed with waste, not the environmental kind, the valuable kind. Every fleck of metal is potential profit. you're told to sweep the floor carefully. Not because anyone wants cleanliness, but because gold dust sticks to everything. Cracks, cobwebs, even your skin. Some shops even have special fuzzy slippers for apprentices to wear, just so they can collect trace gold off the floor with their feet. Glamorous. After sweeping comes filing. Endless filing. The kind of mind-numbing labor that makes you question reality. You file metal bars down into shape, and then file those shapes into other shapes, and then file them again, just because your master said it wasn't smooth enough. There are no shortcuts. Every mistake means more filing. By the end of your first week, your arms are noodles, and your hands are blistered in ways you didn't think were physically possible. You're 8 years old and already walking like a retired knight. Lunch? If you're lucky, it's a bit of pottage or some crusty bread. If you're really lucky, no one throws it at you. The master eats first, then his journeyman, then the dog, then maybe you. Food is fuel, nothing more. And you better not spill it on the gold. Your nights aren't better. Apprentices often live with the master's family. You sleep on a lice-infested straw mat in a corner of the shop, curled up like a tired mouse, between the tongs and the coal bins. No privacy, no quiet, just the snores of your fellow apprentices and the gentle threat of surprise inspections. Sometimes the master sleepwalks. He mumbles about alloys. You learn not to ask. And don't even think about touching the good gold. That's locked away in an iron box under the master's bed, guarded like it's the Holy Grail. You work with brass, copper, tin, basically anything that isn't worth stealing. Your job is to prove you're trustworthy, which is hard when everyone assumes you're a tiny thief. Goldsmiths are paranoid by profession. You might be a child, but you're still a liability. Occasionally, things explode. A crucible cracks, molten silver leaps out, someone miscalculates the alloy ratio, and suddenly half the shop is coughing up smoke. The master curses in 6 languages, most of them invented on the spot. You're told to stand back and learn, which is medieval code for hope this doesn't kill us all. And yet, despite all this, despite the burns, the cuts, the shouted insults, and gruel-based meals, you stay. Because in this world, staying means surviving. Goldsmiths might suffer, but they eat. They wear shoes. Their children live long enough to grow cynical. And one day, if you're lucky, blistered, and just broken enough, you might rise to journeyman. You might get your own tools, your own corner of the bench, your own apprentice to torment. But not yet. Right now, you're 9 years old. Your fingertips are raw. Your shirt smells like charcoal and sweat. You've spent the last hour filing a coin mold only for the master to say, "Do it again." You want to cry. But instead, you nod, pick up the file, and keep scraping. Because you were born to burn. And this is only the beginning. The day a boy became an apprentice to a goldsmith was not marked with celebration. There were no gifts, no feast, no parade of proud relatives, just a firm handshake, a signed contract, and a quiet goodbye as the boy was led into the narrow workshop, where he would spend most of his waking hours for the next 7 to 10 years. Becoming an apprentice wasn't so much a choice as it was a practical decision made by one's father or guardian. If your family had even a whisper of hope for your future, they might secure you a place under a respected goldsmith, often paying a fee for the privilege. And once you were in, there was no turning back. An apprentice's life was not glamorous. It began before dawn and ended long after sunset. In the cold mornings, the boy swept the workshop floor, which was never truly clean. Dust from filings, scraps of metal, and ash from the furnace clung to everything. The boy's hands, even after washing, bore the smell of scorched metal and soot. There were no gloves, no safety gear, just raw fingers and careful precision. The goldsmith's bench was a sacred place, but it was not the apprentice's. Not yet. He could watch, but not touch. Listen, but not speak. His first tasks involved more sweeping than smithing, more fetching than forging. Apprentices began by melting metals. This was far from simple. The crucibles had to be preheated, the furnace carefully stoked, and the right temperature guessed, not measured, because thermometers hadn't been invented yet. One wrong move, and valuable gold could be lost, warped, or worse, wasted entirely. The master would not be pleased, and apprentices learned early that mistakes cost more than materials. They cost trust, and trust was slow to earn. After months of monotony, the apprentice might be allowed to file or hammer metal under supervision. Gold was soft, but unforgiving. One poorly timed strike, and a whole piece could be ruined. Over time, the apprentice learned how to make tiny chains, delicate clasps, and intricate engravings using tools that hadn't changed much in centuries. Tiny chisels, drawn wire, and tongs so crude they looked like firewood prongs. He would spend days repeating the same pattern again and again until it was perfect, or close enough to pass inspection by his master's squinting eyes. The work was detailed, repetitive, and slow. There was no creative freedom. An apprentice did not design. He copied. Templates were reused, motifs recycled. Religious symbols were popular, and so were heraldic patterns, tiny lions, crowns, and saints, etched into rings, brooches, and chalices. Every detail had to be exact. The clientele were often wealthy. Nobles, bishops, merchants with full purses. They demanded perfection, and if their commissioned piece didn't meet expectations, the blame didn't fall on the buyer's poor taste. It landed squarely on the apprentice's back. Meals were simple: bread, broth, cheese, if you were lucky. No lunch break, just a quick bite between tasks. There was little time for leisure. Evenings were sometimes spent running errands for the master's household, collecting firewood, fetching wine, or helping tend to the animals kept behind the shop. Some apprentices lived with their masters, sleeping in small corners of the house. Others returned to cramped rooms they shared with other boys. Privacy was rare. Silence is rarer. And yet, for all this hardship, apprenticeships were coveted. Because if you survived them, if you endured the years of harsh critique, the backbreaking hours, and the never-ending list of tasks, you might one day become a journeyman. And from there, a master goldsmith. With your own bench, your own tools, maybe even an apprentice of your own to boss around. But reaching that stage meant understanding not just the technical skill of shaping metal, but the unspoken rules of the trade. Who to trust, which suppliers offered real silver, and which ones diluted it with tin. How to detect false gold. How to speak to customers in tones that reassured them of your honesty without revealing your desperation for their coin. An apprentice didn't just learn how to polish a ring, he learned how to survive. Punishments were not uncommon. If a boy slacked, he was beaten. If he lied, he was dismissed. If he stole even the tiniest shaving of gold dust, he might be jailed or publicly humiliated, because goldsmithing above all required trust, the kind of trust that nobles and kings were willing to gamble their wealth on. It wasn't just a trade, it was a gatekeeping profession. The community of goldsmiths was tightly knit and fiercely protective. If you ruined your reputation in one town, you might as well leave the region, maybe even the country. And so, the apprentice endured, because in the tiny scraps of time between the toil, there was pride. In the first time, he polished a piece that gleamed just right. In the first time, his master didn't criticize his work. In the whispered compliments overheard from a customer, and maybe, if he was lucky, in the promise of a future beyond the back room of a smoke-stained workshop. The days bled together. The seasons passed. Winters were brutal. Metal chilled the fingers to the bone. Summers were stifling. Furnaces roared while sweat rolled down backs. There were no holidays. Not really. Religious festivals gave brief respite, but work resumed quickly after. The apprentice didn't know leisure. He knew labor. And when, at last, his apprenticeship ended and he was handed his journeyman's tools, there was no applause, no parade, just the slow realization that the hard part was far from over, because now he was expected to make a living. And worse, he had to find someone willing to pay for it. You've made it through another sleepless medieval night on a bed stuffed with straw, lice, and the questionable scent of goat. And now, lucky you, it's time to start your day as a goldsmith. Sounds glamorous, right? Spoiler alert, it isn't. Forget glistening treasure chests and silk-robed clients tossing coins like confetti. Your world smells like scorched hair, looks like smoke-stained walls, and sounds like a constant, soul-pounding clang of metal meeting metal. Let's take a look around your workshop. It's more of a soot-caked broom closet crammed between a tanner's shack and someone's poorly ventilated latrine. The room is barely big enough to swing a hammer in, and yet that's exactly what you'll be doing. Every single day. First up, your hammer. Not the ceremonial kind kings get buried with. No, yours is squat, iron-headed, and lovingly nicknamed Thumb Smasher, for obvious reasons. You use it to flatten gold sheets, shape filigree, and occasionally whack your own knuckles into oblivion. And there's no handle padding, just splinters. Lots of splinters. So every grip is a gamble between crafting a brooch and starting an unplanned thumb amputation. Next on the list, the crucible. Sounds fancy, doesn't it? Like something a wizard might use to brew eternal youth. Nope. It's a squat clay pot that gets heated until it glows like Satan's tea kettle. You toss gold bits into it. Dust, scrap, old coins, that one earring someone lost in the privy. And pray it melts into something you can work with. Crucibles crack. Crucibles spill. Crucibles explode if you so much as breathe wrong near them. Ever tried dodging 1,100 degrees Celsius molten metal in a wooden room? You will. It's like medieval dodgeball, but the ball can liquefy your face. Now, let's talk heat. Your furnace, your forge, is essentially a brick oven stoked with bellows and desperation. You pump the bellows manually because electricity hasn't been invented, and your apprentice is out sick. Probably faking it again. The forge roars with heat hot enough to cook bones, and you're standing inches from it wearing nothing but a wool tunic, scorched shoes, and a thin sheen of sweat and fear. No gloves. No goggles. No "oops, I dropped it" policy. You drop something here, it either sets fire to the place or fuses permanently to your skin. OSHA would have a seizure. When the gold melts, which happens only if the wind doesn't shift, the wood stays dry, and you haven't accidentally ticked off any local saints. You need to shape it. This is where your tools get personal. You grab a blowpipe. Yes, a pipe, and you blow into it. Through your own lungs. You heat up specific points of metal by puffing oxygen into a tiny flame until it's hot enough to bend, melt, or sizzle through your will to live. The catch? If you inhale instead of exhale at the wrong moment, congratulations. You've just tasted medieval fire. Your eyebrows are optional now. Once the gold cools into a manageable shape, usually not the one you intended, out come the files. They come in all sizes: rat tail, flat, half round. All of them blunt enough to test your patience and sharp enough to ruin your fingernails. You file for hours, days, weeks. Your fingertips become calloused stumps. Your wrists creak like old barn doors. And still, that pendant you're making for some minor noblewoman looks like something a drunk chicken could have made with its feet. Lighting? Candlelight flickers like it's haunted, and oil lamps smoke like you're being punished for wanting to see. No windows, no spectacles, just your raw eyes trying to tell the difference between polished gold and something that might just be a smudge of soot from your last minor forge fire. And let's not forget ventilation. The room is thick with metal dust, smoke, and the unmistakable perfume of things gone horribly wrong. You breathe in so many particles, your lungs probably have a gold-to-air ratio that qualifies you as treasure. But hey, at least your coffin will shine. What's that? You're thirsty? Well, don't drink the water, it's medieval, and your hands are blackened with soot, wax, grease, and the residue of whatever mystery substance just dribbled out of the forge. Good luck finding soap. Soap is for the rich and the French. You're lucky if you get to wash your hands in the same bucket the apprentice uses to cool hot tongs. Still not convinced this job sucks? Here's a little bonus fact. Gold melts at about 1,064 degrees Celsius. That's over 1,900 degrees Fahrenheit for our future time travelers. There's no thermometer. You just eyeball it like a lunatic. If it glows like the sun and hisses when you poke it with a stick, it's probably ready. Or it's about to explode. So there you are, sweating through your tunic, hammer in one hand, blowpipe in the other, surrounded by medieval chaos and hoping the final product doesn't look like a lump of regret. You're expected to make delicate jewelry, intricate religious relics, and noble house crests, all while using tools that wouldn't pass inspection in a caveman's garage. Your entire job is a blend of brute strength and surgical precision, and the price for slipping up? Molten gold to the face, or getting sued by a bishop, or worse, tarnishing your reputation in the guild, which is basically career, death, and social exile combined. But hey, at least you've got job security. Because as long as people like shiny things, someone's gotta suffer to make them. And that someone is you. Sleep tight, because you're not just a miserable, underfed peasant anymore. You're now a miserable, underfed goldsmith. Huzzah. Let's start with your hands. They are, as the poets say, a mess. On the one hand, literally, You need calluses thick enough to stop a dagger. Your palms are scorched, nicked, blistered, and covered in a fine layer of grime that no amount of scrubbing removes. Why? Because your work involves open flame, sharp tools, molten metal, and absolutely no safety regulations. OSHA doesn't exist, neither do gloves. Your fingers are constantly either burned, stabbed, or smashed flat from hammering precious metal that somehow always ends up harder than expected. But here's the joke. Despite your hands looking like they've been through 5 minor wars, you also need the touch of a saint. You're expected to chisel filigree so fine it makes lace look clumsy. You're crafting rings, goblets, miniature saints, and royal seals for nobles who will absolutely throw them back at your face if there's even a tiny imperfection. So you grip your engraving tools like a monk holds a quill, balancing between force and finesse, while your joints scream and your eyes water. Ah yes, your eyes. Hope you like squinting, because glasses haven't been invented for commoners. Spectacles exist in theory, made of polished glass or rock crystal, but only monks and upper clergy can afford them. You've got candlelight and your youth. And when your youth runs out, tough luck, old man. Your career dies when your vision goes. Lighting in your workshop is a joke. You get 1 or 2 tallow candles that sputter smoke and smell like wet mutton. Maybe a ray of sun if you've bribed the landlord for a window slot. But don't count on it. You lean closer and closer to your work until you've singed your eyebrows again, trying to make out whether that gold leaf is curling properly or if you've just ruined a day's labor. Spoiler. It's usually the latter. You sit on a stool that might as well be carved from pure regret. There's no cushioning, no backrest, just hard wood and harder hours. Beneath your feet, the floor is a graveyard of metal shavings and charcoal dust, and your lungs are slowly marinating in a stew of chemical fumes and fireplace smoke. Ventilation? Never heard of it. Airflow is for churches and royal halls, not your dingy corner of a workshop that hasn't been cleaned since King Edward's last haircut. Your tools are handmade, mostly by you. Little chisels, hammers, tongs, and crucibles scorched black from countless heatings. You spend half your life just repairing them, and the other half cursing them when they break at the worst possible moment. Need to melt down gold? That means heating a crucible over a flame hot enough to roast a pig, then pouring that liquid fire into a mold you carved yourself, hoping your hands don't slip and brand your arm with the mark of failure. And speaking of failure, one slip-up can cost you everything. You're working with gold, after all. If even a shaving goes missing, the guild assumes theft. There's no oops. There's no honest mistake. There's an Inquisition-level interrogation, a hefty fine, or maybe even the stocks if someone important gets cranky. So you save every flake, sweep your floor like it's sacred, and trap dust in cloths to be burned and sifted later for any lost specks of gold. You literally boil your own rags to get rich, or more accurately, not go to debtor's prison. The guilds don't make it easier. You're part of a goldsmith's guild, whether you like it or not, and that means dues, regulations, and constant inspections. Someone's always checking if your weights are honest, your pieces up to snuff, and your gold properly marked. A single error, and you might be accused of fraud, a crime which, in this century, is punishable by anything from a fine to a hanging, depending on how bored the local magistrate feels. Your customers range from demanding to downright terrifying. Rich nobles with silk gloves and the patience of a hornet show up, waving family crests and impossible commissions. Make me a chalice that sings when touched, they say. Or, engrave my dead uncle's face into this locket, but make him look thinner. You nod, smile, and get to work. Because saying no is not an option when your clients can afford swords and soldiers. Oh, and don't forget, everything must be beautiful. Goldsmithing is not just function. It's prestige. Your work is a statement. If a duke wears your ring, it better make the other dukes jealous. If a bishop drinks from your goblet, he better feel closer to God. And if a prince gives your necklace to his mistress and she frowns, guess whose head is next on the block? So yes, your hands are wrecked, your back is hunched, your lungs are charcoal scented, and your eyes are halfway to darkness. But your craft? It's respected, feared even. You work with gold. You shape wealth with fire and blood and skill, and for one brief moment, before the guild master grumbles again, you are not a peasant. You're an artist, a magician, a miracle worker. Then your chisel slips, again, right across a week's worth of engraving. And you remember, it still sucks to be a goldsmith in medieval times. Your gold came from somewhere far worse, mines, wars, and absolute soul-grinding misery. Let's start with mine. Not the nice little tourist trap kind you might visit today, with hard hats and brochures. No, this is medieval mining, also known as a slow, terrifying death with extra coughing. Picture this: dark, damp tunnels bored into mountains or cliffs, held up by prayer, rot, and wishful thinking. Now toss in a bunch of malnourished peasants with picks, candles, and no ventilation. That's your gold mine. Literally. In places like Bohemia, Saxony, and later in the hills of Transylvania, mining gold meant working 12 to 16 hours a day underground, while your lungs filled with dust and your brain slowly cooked from lack of air. Miners died from collapses, floods, poison gases, and the occasional demon hallucination brought on by moldy rye bread. But hey, gold! The church, of course, had an opinion. They usually had an opinion about everything, and gold mining was no different. As long as someone tithed a good chunk of their golden findings to the local abbey, suddenly the Pope didn't mind if the laborers looked a bit more skeletal than usual. But here's the real kicker. You probably didn't mine your gold locally. Nope. That little ingot you're hammering on your anvil might have taken a long, bloody detour from somewhere in the Islamic world, North Africa, or even further afield. Medieval Europe was surprisingly good at two things: stealing and melting. And you can bet your soot-covered apron they did both. You see, when medieval armies went to war, which was often because peace is boring and doesn't make anyone rich, they weren't just there for glory and God. They were there for loot. And the best loot? Gold. Statues, chalices, coinage, jewelry. It all got stripped, stuffed into sacks, and melted down into unrecognizable bars faster than you could say, "Blessed Crusade." So while your noble patron is bragging about his new golden ring and how it represents purity, chivalry, and divine favor, you're quietly wondering if that same gold once sat on the nose of a statue of Buddha, or inside the mouth of a soldier from Al-Andalus who died screaming in the mud. Gold in the medieval world was not just shiny, it was haunted. every bit of it carried the ghost of someone who'd suffered for it. Slaves in the Mali Empire dug gold out with their bare hands and broken backs, often under rulers like Mansa Musa, who had so much of the stuff he once caused an economic collapse just by handing out too much on a pilgrimage. Thanks, Mansa. But did that stop European merchants from buying it? Of course not. Trade routes across the Sahara, the Levant, and eventually the Baltic funneled gold into Europe like it was liquid sun. Except the sun never had to be melted down in cauldrons over open fires by coughing teenagers. And let's not forget the coins. Medieval kings were constantly minting new ones, often by melting down the old. Some coins were clipped, meaning small slivers were shaved off to hoard or forge. This turned into a full-blown criminal enterprise. And guess who got blamed for that? You, the goldsmith. Because if there's one thing medieval society loved more than gold, it was blaming people for ruining it. You could be dragged before a judge, or worse, a bishop, for suspicion of tampering with the king's coinage. If found guilty, hope you like branding irons and public shaming, because that's your new Friday night. Some goldsmiths were burned at the stake. Others were imprisoned. A few were forced to melt their own stock down in front of angry mobs while chanting psalms. Fun dot. And still, you worked, because gold was power. Not just symbolic power, but real, terrifying, corrupting power. Kings hoarded it. Popes demanded it. Merchants measured their influence in gold florins and ducats. And if you had access to it, even just a few ounces, you weren't just a craftsman. You were a liability, a risk, a threat. Which is ironic, really, because in all your blistered hands and sleepless nights, in all the furnace smoke and moral compromise, you never actually owned the stuff. The gold never belonged to you. It passed through your hands like smoke on its way to someone who'd never once set foot in a mine, never once watched a friend collapse from mercury poisoning, and never once questioned where their shiny goblet came from. And yet, every time you look at it, every time the firelight dances across its smooth, perfect surface, you know exactly what's behind that luster. Mines, wars, and misery. So the next time a baron hands you a pouch and says, "Make it beautiful," maybe try not to laugh out loud, because you know better. It already is beautiful, just not in the way he thinks. It's the beauty of suffering, conquest, and greed. And that is goldsmithing. Let's talk about what you're actually refining. The gold you start with doesn't look like treasure. It looks like gravel scraped from a cursed riverbank. It's mixed with sand, rock, other metals, and dreams that died in the dirt. So your job, lucky you, is to purify it. And the tools at your disposal? Fire, filth, and fluids that should never be handled without gloves. But gloves don't exist yet, so good luck with that. Step 1. Melt it. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Gold melts at 1064 degrees Celsius, and you've got to hit that with a furnace made of medieval mud and prayer. You stoke the fire with charcoal, which produces enough smoke to fumigate a cathedral, and bellows that require the upper body strength of a cathedral door. The heat slams your face like a baker's oven cursed by a dragon. Once the gold is bubbling like devil soup, now comes the fun part. You add lead. Yes, lead, the stuff that ruins brains and shortens lifespans. In medieval goldsmithing, it was used to help draw out impurities. Because why not throw poison into molten lava while standing barefoot in a wooden hut? The lead bonds with unwanted metals like copper and silver, which are then drawn off in the slag, leaving behind something closer to pure gold. At this point, the fumes alone could knock over a mule. You're breathing in lead vapor, ash, and microscopic gold dust, which sounds fancy until it clogs your lungs. There's no mask, just your ragged shirt pulled up over your mouth, which does absolutely nothing except get sweatier. But wait, it gets worse, because now you need to separate the gold even further, and for that, you're going to need urine. Yes, human urine, not a metaphor. Actual pee. See, medieval refiners discovered that aqua regia, a blend of nitric and hydrochloric acid that dissolves gold, was great in theory, but not always available or stable. So they improvised. The ammonia found in stale urine helped break down impurities and clean gold leaf. So there you are, dunking precious metals into a bowl of hot peasant pee, pretending this is somehow noble work. The smell? Picture this. A week-old chamber pot left in the sun, stirred with rotten eggs and charcoal, then lit on fire. Now put your face right next to it for 4 hours. That's your Tuesday. You might ask, where do they get all the urine? Community donations. Really? People, especially apprentices, are encouraged to contribute to the goldsmith's refining process. You're not just learning metallurgy, you're part of a medieval urinal supply chain. Every morning, you pour jars of the stuff into vats like some alchemist of bodily waste. Once the metal's been bathed in lead, boiled in pee, and burned half to death, it gets hammered flat and filed down. You'd think this part would smell better. It doesn't, because now you're grinding fine metal over a pile of ash and soot while your skin is coated in a layer of sweat, dust, and regrets. Even your clothes have absorbed it. There's no laundry soap strong enough to wash out molten metal funk mixed with urea fumes. You walk home smelling like a haunted forge, and dogs avoid you. That's right. Dogs avoid you. That's how bad it is. Now imagine doing this every day for years. You don't just smell like refining gold. You are the smell. It follows you, sleeps with you, wakes with you. People know what you do by scent alone. Ah yes, there goes young Thomas. Smells like boiled piss and fire. Must be a goldsmith. But here's the kicker. This process doesn't guarantee success. Sometimes you lose the gold. It runs off with the slag. Or your furnace cracks. Or you overheat the lead, and it takes half your yield with it. That's hours of work, days even, gone. And your master is now fuming, like the very pit you melted it in. Oh, and if you mess up too many times, there's always the lingering threat of being accused of theft, because gold is precious, and apprentices aren't trusted. If the weight of the refined gold doesn't match expectations, people don't assume, oh, must have been an honest mistake. They assume you stole it. And then they involve the guild, or worse, the guards, or worst of all, the client, who might be a nobleman with a temper and a sword. So no, refining gold wasn't glamorous. It was dangerous, disgusting, and soul-crushing. You worked with deadly chemicals, open flames, and other people's pee, all for the privilege of maybe being allowed to polish a necklace that someone else gets credit and coin for. This is the part of goldsmithing no one sang ballads about. There are no tapestries of men stirring piss in iron bowls. No heroic tales of a lad who braved ammonia fumes to purify 5 ounces of ore. But without this, there'd be no crowns, no chalices, no gilded reliquaries. Every sparkling piece in a noble's treasury started life as a lump of stinking, smoking misery. And now, you know. So the next time you look at a medieval gold ring and think, how beautiful, just remember, someone probably boiled that thing in pee and then wore it proudly. Now, let's say you've just been accused of fraud. Again. And it's not even noon yet. Let's talk about fakes, because your world is full of them. First, there's gilded copper, a fan favorite among less than honest smiths. You take a copper brooch, dip it in mercury, paint a whisper-thin film of gold over it, and polish it until it shines like St. Peter's halo. To the average peasant, or even a half-blind bishop, it looks like solid gold. Until, of course, it doesn't. A few weeks of wear, some sweat, maybe a sneeze too close, and boom, the shimmer peels off like week old onion skin. What's left? Angry customers, accusations, possibly prison, possibly worse. Then there's the charming world of counterfeit coinage. Picture this: the king mints coins with his divine, puffy-cheeked face stamped in gold. You're supposed to take that coin, weigh it, test it, maybe sniff it a little. Because yes, people did that and swear it's legit. But here's the problem. Everyone's shaving the edges, just a little. A sliver here, a speck there. Collect enough crumbs from enough coins, and you've got a tidy profit melting in your back room. Until the royal inspector shows up. Because in your century, every ruler is obsessed with weight. Not the kind that makes trousers tight, but the kind that makes empires run. A coin that's too light? It's treason. A scale that tips wrong? It's a hanging. You're working under constant scrutiny from men with wax seals and very little chill. You think modern tax audits are bad? Try getting caught with clipped silver in 1398. It's less penalty fee and more goodbye fingers. Now let's say you were actually trying to be honest. Bless your naive little soul. You just sold a ring to a local noblewoman. It's a delicate thing. Tiny rubies, a braided band, an inscription that probably says something scandalous in Latin. You swear it's pure. You triple-checked the alloy. You weighed it grain by grain. You even blessed it with incense just to be safe. But 2 weeks later, her steward shows up with a message. The lady's ring has tarnished. She is displeased. Please come explain. With your neck. Cue the sweating. Maybe it was sabotage. Maybe the apprentice used the wrong crucible. Maybe her sweaty medieval fingers just had weird chemistry. Doesn't matter. You're hauled before the city magistrate, accused of fraud, and made to stand next to 3 other goldsmiths who are also having a very bad day. Now you're publicly examined by a guild officer with a microscope made of pure judgment. He weighs the ring. He scratches it. He rubs it against a whetstone while muttering about your mother. And if he decides it's fake, you owe triple the ring's value. Your shop gets closed for a week. And you get to stand in the market square wearing a sign that says, "False Smith," while children throw cabbage at you. Spoiled cabbage. The worst kind. If you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you're accused of cheating a noble, which is less slap on the wrist and more goodbye career, hello dungeon. Medieval nobles aren't known for their forgiveness or accuracy. One bad rumor, and suddenly you're the goldsmith who poisoned the Duchess, or the guy who tried to melt down the bishop's chalice for gambling money. The worst part? Sometimes they planted fakes. That's right. It's not just thieves and desperate apprentices screwing with your stock. It's customers, too. A rival merchant drops off a payment in coin, then swaps one out for a counterfeit, then accuses you of passing it. Or a noblewoman claims her necklace was never gold, even though she wore it to 5 feasts and a christening. What do? Nothing. You're a goldsmith, not a knight. Your sword is a hammer, and your only armor is a stained apron. But maybe you're feeling bold. You decide to prove your innocence. You've just agreed to a trial by fire. Literally. Some towns, especially the extra enthusiastic ones, offer you the chance to clear your name by holding a red-hot iron bar and walking a few paces. If your hands don't blister, you're innocent. If they do, you're a fraud. Spoiler alert, they always blister. So you become cautious, paranoid even. Every coin is examined like it's cursed. Every ring is tested twice. You start carrying a pocket scale, a touchstone, a little vial of acid, and possibly a dagger, just in case the angry customer of the day gets stabby. It's exhausting. All you wanted to do was melt shiny stuff and make pretty things. But here you are, constantly dodging lawsuits, accusations, scams, and the occasional torch-wielding mob. Because in the medieval world, gold is trust. And trust is fragile. So next time someone hands you a coin with a crooked stamp or asks for just a touch more gold in the alloy, you smile, you nod, and you start planning your escape route. Because being a goldsmith isn't just about skill, it's about survival. You finally clawed your way through 10 years of apprenticeship, 2 mental breakdowns, and 1 minor forge fire that nearly burned your eyebrows off. And now, at last, you're ready to call yourself a goldsmith. Except, surprise, you can't. Not officially. Not unless the guild says so. Ah yes, the guild. That glorious, sanctified cartel of grumpy old metal snobs who control every last speck of gold in the city. You thought your workbench was your kingdom? Please, without their approval, you're just a guy who hammers trash. Let's walk through your morning. You show up to your shop, bleary-eyed, soot-stained, and barely caffeinated, because coffee hasn't even been invented yet. You light your forge. You're halfway through polishing a brooch when you hear the knock. Knock, knock, knock. That's not a customer. That's the guild inspector. Or as you've come to think of him, the walking ulcer. He steps inside like he owns the place, which, legally speaking, he kind of does. Everything from your tools to the thickness of your rings falls under his divine jurisdiction. Even your soldering technique can land you in hot water. Used the wrong alloy? That's a fine. Didn't mark the piece with the official guild stamp? That's another. Accidentally used gold that's slightly too impure because your apprentice was half asleep and measured it wrong. That's a punishment. Possibly public. See, this isn't just quality control. This is a sacred ritual of humiliation and fear. Guilds take purity seriously, not go to confession purity. Metallic purity. Gold is supposed to be 24 carats. You deliver 23.9? You're a disgrace. You deliver 23.5? That's fraud. Deliver anything less than that, and you might as well walk yourself to the stocks and start rehearsing your apology to God. Let's talk about the rules. There are so many. You need a scroll. just to remember which ones you're breaking. You must weigh everything. You must document every gram. You must use guild-approved crucibles, guild-approved hammers, guild-approved thinking patterns. You can't sell after dusk. You can't sell on Sunday. You can't sell to people who aren't registered clients. You can't even look like you're enjoying your work too much, or someone will assume you're cheating. And then there are the spies. Yes, spies. The guild has them. No, not shadowy figures in hoods, just your fellow goldsmiths, watching you from across the square while pretending to sweep their stoop. They report back. Master Hugo used an unapproved alloy. Journeyman Otto was seen melting coin gold. Apprentice Franz coughed in the workshop, probably trying to poison the crucible. They report everything. Why? Because promotion in the guild isn't about merit. It's about politics. You want to move up the ranks? You don't just make great jewelry. You kiss the right rings. You attend the meetings. You nod at the correct old men until your neck cramps. You backstab with a smile and a firm handshake. Oh, and don't even think about working outside the guild. That's called being a rogue. Rogues don't get guild protection, which means if someone accuses you of shaving a few grains off your customer's necklace, there's no one to defend you. You're just a thief now. Good luck convincing the guards otherwise while they toss your anvil into the river and confiscate your tools as evidence. Let's say you get caught breaking a guild rule. What's the punishment? A gentle slap on the wrist? Number fines that cripple your shop? Public shaming in front of the cathedral? In extreme cases, they make you parade through town holding the offending piece like a medieval walk of shame. Behold the ring that was only 21 carats. The crowd hurls turnips. Your wife won't look at you. Your dog judges you. And guess what? Sometimes you don't even break the rule. Someone just says you did. That's enough for an investigation. Maybe the inspector finds something wrong. Maybe not. But either way, you've lost a week of work and gained 3 ulcers. Congratulations. Now, here's the kicker. These rules aren't even consistent. They change depending on who's in charge, which city you're in, and what phase the moon is in, for all you can tell. One day, engraving a bishop's seal is totally fine. The next, unauthorized ecclesiastical design. That's a fine. Another fine. Always another fine. You start to suspect the fines are the whole point. Like the guild isn't even trying to keep quality up. It's just another medieval shakedown. A protection racket with fancier robes. But you stay. You endure. Because outside, the guild is worse. Outside the guild, you have no voice, no buyers, no hope. And if you ever manage to claw your way up the guild ranks yourself, well, then you get to do the inspecting. You get to carry the big wax seal. You get to knock on doors and watch some poor bastard tremble as you point out that his clasp is 0.3 millimeters off regulation. And in that moment, you feel a warm, quiet power. Not respect, not joy, just relief. Relief that, for once, it's not you being dragged through the mud. So yeah, guilds. They kept the gold pure. They kept the competition fair. They also kept your blood pressure dangerously high and your soul in a constant state of low-level panic. But hey, at least you're not a baker. Their guild makes this one look gentle. Congratulations. You survived, and you're no longer a sniveling apprentice with blistered fingers and soot in your eyes. You're the master now. That's right. You've got your own shop, your name on a plank swinging outside, and if you're lucky, a hammer that hasn't rusted to hell. Of course, none of this means life's any easier. If anything, you've just earned the privilege of suffering in entirely new and more expensive ways. Your shop is smack in the middle of the market street, prime real estate, if you ignore the smell of boiling fish guts wafting in from the next stall, and the choir of toothless hag merchants shouting about onions like their lives depend on it. Because they do. Everyone's life depends on something here. Yours depends on convincing sweaty nobles and overly devout bishops that your latest bit of molten metal is worth more than the wheat that they didn't harvest this year. The front of the shop is your display stall, a wooden counter, a creaky awning, and a row of carefully arranged shiny bits meant to impress anyone wandering by. Gilded brooches, hammered rings, maybe even a chalice or two if you're feeling cocky. You leave the door open so customers can peek inside. That's your trap. See, behind the stall is where the real madness begins. The shop interior is dim, smoky, and somehow always humid, even when it's cold. It's part smithy, part bank, part panic room. There's soot on everything, including you, and the smell of melted flux, singed leather, and warm metal clings to your skin like a second, much sadder outfit. To the untrained eye, it looks like chaos. But to you, it's a sacred ballet of tools and terror. There's the bench where you sketch commissions you'll definitely regret agreeing to. The tiny forge crackling in the corner, ready to ruin your week with a single puff of black smoke. And of course, the grinding wheel, worn to a nub, just like your patience. In the center, your master's table. It's the closest thing to a throne you'll ever sit on, covered in wax, dents, burn marks, and the occasional smear of dried blood from where your apprentice got too cozy with the engraving chisel. This is where you weigh gold on your tiny, twitchy scale, because every grain matters, literally. Get it wrong, and you'll either get cheated by a noble or dragged before the guild for devaluing the art. Either way, someone's shouting. You've got drawers full of molds, dies, and little parchment scrolls with client notes like, "Fat Bishop wants ring with angels, hates snakes, or Countess still mad about last necklace. Don't use red stones." Each piece is a political landmine. The wrong crest, the wrong material, or just the wrong vibe, and you're not getting paid. You're getting thrown into the mud outside the city wall. And speaking of payment, welcome to your next daily headache. Bartering. Money? Sure. Sometimes. But more often than not, a knight pays you with a half-dead goose and the vague promise of protection. A baker offers bread. A noble offers land rights that don't exist. And of course, someone always tries to pay with exposure. You can't eat exposure, and you can't smelt it either. Security? You bet you've thought of that. Behind the main workshop wall, you've hidden a vault. Not one of those fairy tale treasure rooms, but a small stone closet sealed with an iron key you wear around your neck, under your shirt, like a nervous little amulet. Inside, coin pouches, raw ingots, half-finished commissions you can't afford to lose, and, if you're especially clever, a false back panel leading to an even smaller compartment, just in case. At night, you sleep here, not in a real bed. Don't be ridiculous. You curl up behind your workbench like a paranoid raccoon, one eye open, hammer within reach. Because if thieves don't get you, an angry client might. And if neither of those show up, there's always fire. Or rats. Or your apprentice spilling hot gold into your shoes. Again. And let's not forget the parade of visitors. First, the guild inspector, who shows up unannounced, fingers your wares like he's selecting grapes, and declares you're 0.3% underweight on your last sale. That will be a fine. Then there's the priest demanding a free donation for the church's new reliquary. You don't say no. You just swallow your dignity and give him a goblet you were saving for rent. Later, a noble shows up. He doesn't knock. He doesn't say hello. He holds out a piece of parchment with a badly drawn lion and says, "Make this into a brooch. Tomorrow." You explain that this will take a week. Minimum. He blinks. "Tomorrow," he says again, and then drops a purse of silver on your counter and walks out. He expects a miracle. You expect to lose sleep. Again. The only time you catch your breath is when you're hunched over a new piece. Just you, your tools, and the glint of something valuable in the candlelight. You let the world fade. You shape metal like clay, coaxing beauty from heat and pressure. For a moment, you remember why you chose this life. Then, the door creaks. Your apprentice shouts something about a customer puking on the display table. You sigh, wipe your hands, and step back into the chaos. Because this is your shop, your pride, your prison, your battlefield, and you've got another 16 hours before you can lie on a pile of rags and call it sleep. Welcome to the master's table. You've earned it. Then you've finally got yourself an apprentice. A young, wide-eyed, soot-smudged little human who smells like fear and scorched wool. Maybe his name's Tom. Maybe it's Bert. Doesn't matter. He'll probably answer to, "Oi, you," because that's all he's going to hear for the next 7 years. See, apprenticeships in the goldsmithing trade aren't internships. They're indentured servitude with molten metal. You don't pay him. He pays you. Or more likely, his parents do, scraping together coins for the honor of having their only son nearly set himself on fire while learning how not to bend a crucifix in half. You remember your first week, right? Of course you don't. The trauma blocked it out, but it probably involved blisters, burns, and someone screaming, "Not that crucible, you idiot," as molten silver kissed your bare forearm. Apprenticeship is basically medieval hazing, except instead of beer and bad tattoos, it's molten gold and permanent nerve damage. Your new apprentice, he's no different. Give it 20 minutes and he'll ruin something irreplaceable. He'll sneeze into the engraving powder, or hammer a filigree brooch so hard it looks like a squashed insect. Or, heaven help you, mix up the tin and the gold, and produce a necklace that turns green in the sun and makes Lady Marjorie's neck smell like a penny. And let's talk about the forge, that hellish, roaring box of flame where accidents live and apprentices go to cry. One wrong move, just one distracted moment, and your boy's sleeve brushes the fire. The stench of burnt wool fills the room. You slap the flame out while cursing in Latin and praying your journeyman didn't see. Burns are common. Third-degree ones, too. And you better hope they heal right, because there's no workers' comp in medieval Florence. Just a pat on the back and a reminder not to do it again. Oh, and did we mention the thievery? Because gold is, well, gold. And apprentices are human. Some of them have wandering fingers. And when you catch them, because you always do, eventually, it's never a grand heist. It's a pathetic little pinch of shavings hidden in a boot heel, or a tiny ingot stashed in the bread bin, wrapped in a rag like it's going to sprout legs and escape. You want to be furious, but you also kind of admire the effort. And then you banish him. Or worse, turn him over to the guild for punishment. Spoiler alert. The guild has no sense of humor about stolen metal. But sometimes the accidents aren't criminal. They're just stupid. Like when young Tom forgets to seal the mold, and you end up with a puddle of gold on the floor and a commission that was due yesterday. Or when he polishes a relic with vinegar instead of oil and wipes a century's worth of detail straight off the Virgin Mary's robe. The worst part isn't the loss, it's the explanation. Try telling a bishop his saint's femur now looks like a chicken wing because your apprentice mistook it for scrap. Of course, some accidents are more dramatic. Let's say you're working on a crown clasp, intricate work, tiny hinges, precious gems. You step away for a moment to check the furnace. You come back, and your apprentice, eager to be helpful, has finished it for you. Except his idea of finishing involves a bent pin, a cracked sapphire, and glue. GLUE, animal glue. As if you're selling trinkets in the market next to the pig cellar. And heaven forbid your apprentice tries to show off. You turn your back. He grabs the tongs, tries to pour gold into a mold like he's been doing it for years, except he hasn't. His hands shake. He spills. It hits his foot. Now he's screaming. You're screaming. Everyone's screaming. And the shop smells like burning boots. Again. The thing no one tells you about goldsmithing is that it's less about artistry and more about managing disaster. Your hands must be steady. Your breath must be calm. Your apprentice must be watched like a hawk stalking a drunk rabbit. Because everything around you is expensive, dangerous, and flammable. And everything he touches is either on fire or ruined. Even the good ones, the ones with actual talent, will break something. Usually at the worst possible moment. Usually when you're in debt up to your eyeballs and counting on that one chalice to get you out. Oops, he says, staring at the snapped stem in his trembling hands. It just broke. And you look at him like he's a goat that learned to talk. Because the only thing more terrifying than malice is incompetence. Of course, accidents don't stop just because someone's no longer an apprentice. You've burned yourself more times than you care to count. Your knuckles are permanently singed. Your eyes water every morning. Your back? A brittle, cracked mess from decades hunched over metal. But at least you don't ruin commissions by wiping acid on polished gold. At least you know not to leave wax molds next to the furnace. At least you don't sneeze into the powder. But your apprentice? He will. And you'll yell. You'll threaten. You'll swear you're kicking him out tomorrow. But you won't. Because deep down, you remember what it was like. You remember the fear, the burns, the first time you ruined a bishop's brooch and thought your life was over. And one day, if the kid survives, he'll be the master. He'll take an apprentice. He'll scream when they scratch the chalice. He'll cry when they melt the clasp. And the cycle will continue forever and ever. Amen. So here's to the apprentices. The clumsy, soot-faced disasters of the medieval goldsmith world. They ruin everything, and yet somehow they're the future. Just Don't let them near the ruby goblet again. Seriously, you've just landed a customer, and not just any customer, a noble, or worse, a bishop. Lucky you. You thought you were stressed about melting down gold without scorching your own eyebrows? Huh. That was the tutorial. Now comes the final boss. Custom commissions for people who think divine right means you get executed if I'm slightly disappointed. You're a goldsmith in medieval Europe, which means you're basically a cross between an artist, a blacksmith, and a very sweaty accountant. You've clawed your way up from apprentice to master, earned your guild badge, and finally opened your own workshop. And today, you get the knock on the door. You hear it before you see it. The clink of chainmail, the smug voice of a clerk, and the distinct aura of unpaid labor. A noble steward strolls in like he owns the place. He doesn't even look at you, just flings a scroll onto your workbench with the lazy confidence of someone who's never held a hammer in his life. His lordship requires a chalice, he announces, like it's the most obvious thing in the world. By Michaelmas. You blink. Michaelmas is 3 weeks away. You were hoping to have time to sleep this month, but apparently not. You unroll the scroll. It's not just a chalice. It's a masterpiece of ego carved into parchment. Gold base, silver stem, ruby inlays, tiny saints all the way around, each with a halo so intricate you'll need a magnifying glass, which doesn't exist yet. You nod and grunt something respectful, because this is the part where you pretend to have a choice. You don't. If you say no, word gets around that you refused a noble. Suddenly, nobody wants to commission you. Not even the fishmonger's wife. You'll be lucky to get a job engraving belt buckles for drunken knights who forget to pay. If you say yes and do it wrong, same outcome. Except this time, there's also a real chance of prison, torture, or just vanishing mysteriously into the river with your boots still on. So, of course, you say yes. Then the steward does the most terrifying thing of all. He pays you up front. Not fully, mind you, just enough to ruin your life. See, taking money in advance means you're legally responsible now. If anything happens, fire, theft, your apprentice dropping the chalice into the privy, you owe it back. In full, plus interest, plus reparations, which is noble speak for, we take your tools and possibly your family goat. You barely sleep for the next 19 days. Your fingers are raw, your eyes bloodshot, and your entire workshop smells like hot metal and panic. You hammer, you solder, you engrave saints so tiny they make your pupils twitch. You do not make a single mistake, because you know that even one malformed halo could mean a flogging. Your apprentice offers to help. You tell him to go organize the coal pile alphabetically. And then comes the delivery. You don't just hand it off, you polish it until your own face stares back at you from the gold like a ghost. You wrap it in cloth, softer than your own mattress. You pray. Then you walk, no, tremble, through the city toward the noble's estate, every step a chance for disaster. Thieves, potholes, a chicken getting underfoot and sending you sprawling face first into the mud. All possible, all probable. You arrive. The steward takes it. Then, horror of horrors, he inspects it. He squints. He turns it. He runs one suspicious finger along the rim. For a moment, you swear he's going to lick it. You're sweating so hard it's dripping onto your boots. And then, just as you think the inspection might turn into a public trial, he nods. "It will do," he says. You almost collapse. You don't, because passing out in front of a noble might be misinterpreted as sarcasm and land you in the stocks. You shuffle home. You drink the cheapest ale you can find. You sleep for 14 hours straight. The next morning, your apprentice tells you there's a new commission. It's from the bishop. And this man is worse than the noble. The bishop wants a reliquary. Not just any reliquary, mind you, but one for the finger bone of Saint Repressivus, the Severe. It needs to inspire awe, be visible from 10 paces, and radiate divine authority, but also stay within the diocesan budget, which is roughly what you made from selling that half-cracked comb last month. You start over. Now, you're shaping gold into tiny arches. You're setting stones that some monk claims are holy, even though they look suspiciously like colored glass. You're building a box to house a single human knuckle, and if it doesn't bring someone to tears, it's considered a failure. The bishop comes to inspect it personally. He arrives wearing more rings than you've made this year, trailing incense and judgment. He squints at the reliquary. He hums. He mutters something about modesty in the eyes of the Lord, even though his robes cost more than your entire workshop. He says he'll think about it. Think about it. You wait 3 days. When he finally returns, he announces he's changed his mind. He wants the saints to have wings, realistic wings, and he wants it by the feast of St. Tyrannicus, which is in, surprise, 5 days. You protest. He raises an eyebrow. You accept. Because again, if you fail to deliver, it's not just a bad review. It's excommunication, or prison, or maybe just a mysterious death ruled natural causes, because nobody wants to argue with the bishop. So you work. You sweat. You carve wings so fine they snap if you even look at them too hard. You deliver the final reliquary on time. The bishop looks at it for half a second and says, "Yes, this will bring glory to God." No mention of your work, no blessing, no tip. You limp home, hands blistered, spine screaming. And as you collapse onto your straw bed, you realize you'll do it again. Because you have to. Because in medieval Europe, being a goldsmith means walking a tightrope of deadlines, egos, and divine expectations, all while holding a hammer, blindfolded, over molten metal. And the worst part? You're still the lucky one. You're not a peasant. You're not a leper. You're not a rat. You're a craftsman. You're a medieval goldsmith. And your next customer just knocked on the door. Now you might imagine yourself crafting shining rings and glorious crowns all day, the envy of nobles and the delight of bishops. But hold your horses. Before you even touch your first lump of molten gold, you've got to navigate a maze of paperwork so mind-numbingly Byzantine that even the devil himself would take a nap halfway through. Welcome to the glorious medieval world of licenses, fines, and bribes, where your survival depends not just on your skill with a hammer, but on your skill at bribing sweaty officials and dodging inspectors who smell like a mix of stale ale and despair. First things first, if you want to legally practice your art, you need a license. Yes, that's right. Medieval cities loved bureaucracy. Goldsmiths were required to have permission from the city's guild, the town council, or sometimes both. This wasn't just a piece of parchment you casually hung on your wall. This license was your lifeline, proof that you were allowed to operate, or else risk having your tools smashed and your workshop shut down faster than you could say carrot. Getting this license was no picnic. You had to pay a hefty fee up front, sometimes a sum that could buy you a cow or two, and that fee was just the start. The Guild, a powerful organization made up of your fellow goldsmiths, or rivals, wanted to make sure you weren't a fraud. They sent inspectors to check your workshop regularly, looking for evidence that you followed the Guild's strict rules about quality, weight, and methods. Spoiler alert, inspectors love to find fault. If you messed up, say your gold was too light, or your chain's links looked dodgy, you'd face fines that could ruin you. These weren't small penalties either. We're talking sums large enough to swallow a month's profit, sometimes more. The Guild didn't care if you had a starving family or a sick wife. They wanted perfection, and they wanted their cut. But here's where the fun really begins: the bribes. Because no one, absolutely no one, in medieval bureaucracy did anything without a little grease on the palms. Inspectors had the power to destroy your livelihood with a single raised eyebrow. Guild officials could stall your paperwork for months on end. City clerks could misplace your documents if you didn't slip them a coin or two. So, if you wanted to keep your license and your sanity, you had to learn the delicate art of bribery. Maybe it was a few coins slipped into a pocket during a meeting. Maybe it was a roast chicken or a barrel of ale delivered just because. Sometimes, goldsmiths gave away tiny pieces of their own precious metal as gifts. After all, who better to bribe than a man who deals in gold all day? These bribes weren't considered corruption. Oh no, they were called customary payments or gifts. The polite way medieval society said, pay up or shut up. Everyone did it. The guild masters turned a blind eye because they were getting paid too. City officials pretended to frown, but pocketed the coins with greedy grins. The system was a well-oiled machine of payoffs, favors, and whispered threats. Of course, if you got caught bribing, or worse, if your bribe wasn't enough, you faced severe punishments. Fines for bribery could be as steep as those for shoddy craftsmanship. Sometimes the king's men got involved. Bribery was technically illegal, but proving it? Nearly impossible. So most goldsmiths just kept their heads down and their coin purses open. Let's talk about taxes too. Medieval cities loved to squeeze every last penny out of their tradesmen. Your workshop was taxed on everything, on the size of your space, on the value of your materials, even on your apprentices. If you dared to hire more than a certain number of apprentices, expect a fine. If your inventory was worth more than the city's tax threshold, you'd pay a steep levy. Taxes were a nightmare. You had to keep detailed records of your stock, how much gold you had, how much silver, how many finished pieces were waiting to be sold. And those records had to be shown to tax collectors on demand. Lie or underestimate, and you'd be charged with fraud. Tell the truth, and you'd pay through the nose. But you could guess which option most goldsmiths picked. And guess what? More bribes. The tax collectors' greed often outmatched the guild's inspectors. If you wanted your tax bill to shrink by even a fraction, you found a way to slip a few coins their way. it wasn't charity. It was survival. This endless tug of war with officials was exhausting. You spent as much time worrying about inspections, licenses, and taxes as you did actually working your craft. Your days began with prayers that no inspector would drop by, and ended with counting coins to see if you could afford your bribes. Some goldsmiths got creative to avoid the hassle. They'd operate under the radar, selling their wares without licenses or hiding gold in secret compartments. This was risky business. If caught, punishments ranged from confiscation of goods to public shaming, fines, or even jail. The city didn't tolerate black market goldsmiths lightly, but desperation made many fools of many. Some tried to forge their licenses or bribe officials to approve false paperwork. This was a game of chance. One wrong move, and you could lose everything. And because medieval courts loved a public spectacle, your humiliation could be made very public indeed. Paraded through town with your tools, smashed and your name spat on. For years to come. You learned quickly that goldsmithing wasn't just about skill with metal. It was about knowing who to talk to, who to pay, and how to stay invisible to the ever-watchful eyes of guild masters, city officials, and tax collectors. It was a balancing act on a knife's edge, a daily gamble that could make or break your life. And if you think all this sounds like a racket designed to squeeze out every last penny from honest craftsmen, congratulations. You're catching on. Medieval cities were machines of greed disguised as order. And goldsmiths? They were the ones stuck spinning in the gears. So next time you admire a medieval gold ring, think about the tangled mess behind its shine. The fees, the bribes, the fines, the threats. Because for every piece of glittering treasure, there was a goldsmith sweating under the weight of paperwork heavier than the gold itself. And that, my friend, is why being a goldsmith in medieval times really sucked. You don't just shape precious metal, you also double as the town's unofficial banker. Because here's the thing, there's no central bank, no digital transfer, no safe vault to stash your coins. There's only you, your reputation, your pile of gold and silver, and a long line of desperate nobles, merchants, and peasants looking to borrow your shiny treasure. This is the dangerous art of lending. You might think, goldsmith, moneylender, same thing, right? Well, yes and no. Officially, goldsmiths are craftsmen, not bankers. But in practice, you're often both. See? You have the gold. You know how to measure it. You have the trust of the wealthy. And if someone comes knocking with a sack of coins, asking to hold it for safekeeping, you can't just say no. Except lending money wasn't a polite neighborhood favor. It was a minefield coated in legal, religious, and social landmines, waiting to explode in your face. First off, let's talk about religion. The church hated usury with a passion that would make your head spin. Charging interest on loans, a sin, a crime, a ticket to eternal damnation, and maybe a nice public shaming at the town square. You might be a skilled goldsmith, but if you were caught lending money with interest, you risked excommunication, kicked out of the church and cut off from society. No last rites, no mass, no holy water, no funeral service. You were dead to the community, even if you were very much alive. But everyone needed loans. Nobles needed quick cash to fund wars or lavish feasts. Merchants needed funds to buy exotic spices or silk from distant lands. Peasants sometimes needed a few coins to survive a bad harvest. And you? You had the gold. So, you did what everyone did. You lent money, often under the table, hoping to keep your interest rates fair, your clients happy, and the church off your back. But fair was relative. Fair meant you charged enough to turn a profit, but not so much that your client went broke. Or worse, so much that the church caught wind and branded you a heretic. The risks? Huge. Let's start with excommunication. You know that awful feeling of waking up in the cold, realizing you're cut off from the only community you've ever known? That's the spiritual equivalent of medieval social death. Excommunicated goldsmiths were pariahs. Customers fled. Nobles refused to deal with you. You couldn't marry your daughter, bury your father properly, or even enter the market square without whispers and pointed fingers. And that's assuming you only angered the church. What about your clients? Lending money was a dice roll with loaded chips. If a noble couldn't repay their loan, they might turn nasty. Imagine owing a lord a pile of gold, then watching him swagger into your shop with a band of guards, demanding his property back, by force if necessary. Maybe they'd threaten to accuse you of fraud, or worse, theft. Sometimes, unpaid debts led to violent mob attacks on your workshop, smashing your tools, stealing your stock, burning your records. One bad loan could ruin you. And that wasn't all. There were stories, whispered in shadowy taverns, about goldsmiths disappearing after a bad deal. A nobleman, powerful and untouchable, borrowed a huge sum and vanished. The goldsmith who dared to ask for repayment found themselves accidentally mugged on a lonely road, or worse, thrown in jail on trumped-up charges. Some never returned. Then there was the matter of reputation. Lending wasn't just about money. It was a social gamble. If you were known as a merciless lender, charging exorbitant interest, punishing late payers by cutting off their credit, or worse, you'd earn the nickname the Wolf or the Vulture. That scared off future clients. Worse still, townsfolk might refuse to trade with you or spread rumors that your gold was counterfeit. A death sentence in a business built entirely on trust. So what did you do? How did you survive? First, you had to be careful who you lent to. Nobles were risky but prestigious clients. Merchants were reliable but always looking for better deals. Peasants, usually too poor to repay. You developed an eye for character, studying how your clients walked, talked, and dressed. You'd often require collateral, a ring, a land deed, a servant's labor, something to hold over their heads if they didn't pay up. Contracts were handwritten, painstakingly detailed, and sometimes sealed with wax or the borrower's mark. But contracts meant little if your debtor was powerful or desperate enough to ignore them. And then came the interest rates. Officially, the church forbade interest. Unofficially, everyone knew the fee for lending money existed, and it varied wildly depending on the risk and your own nerve. A typical rate might be 10 to 20%, but during desperate times, it could climb to 30% or more. Charging too much was gambling with your soul. Charging too little was gambling with your livelihood. To protect yourself, some goldsmiths formed secret alliances, guilds or networks that helped enforce debt collection, shared intelligence on risky clients, and provided mutual protection. If a client defaulted, the guild might send debt collectors, men with rough hands and sharper threats. Sometimes these collectors were little more than thugs, but that was the price of survival. Of course, you couldn't openly advertise these services. Lending money was supposed to be beneath a craftsman's dignity. But with the kingdom's coin in your hands, power was irresistible. Some goldsmiths quietly set up loan books, tracking who owed what and when, and even created accounts for trusted clients. A few even operated from behind secret compartments in their shops, hidden drawers stuffed with IOUs, letters of credit, and notes on interest. But that led to paranoia. Because if your loan books fell into the wrong hands, a rival goldsmith, a disgruntled apprentice, or an angry debtor, your entire business could collapse overnight. The town council might get involved, accusing you of illegal lending or forgery. You might be summoned to court, humiliated, fined, or worse, thrown into a dank jail cell with rats and no coin for bail. Then there was the ever-present threat of mob justice. People in medieval towns didn't always trust the law. If they thought you were cheating neighbors or extorting widows, a crowd could form outside your workshop with torches and pitchforks. Goldsmiths had been known to flee towns under cover of night to escape angry mobs fueled by debt and suspicion. And yet, despite all this, lending money was lucrative. It was the dark side of the glittering trade, where goldsmiths balanced on a knife's edge between respectability and ruin, piety and greed, survival and disgrace. Every loan was a risk. Every coin lent was a gamble with your life, your reputation, and your very soul. So the next time you admire a delicate gold ring, remember, behind that shimmer lies a world of dangerous deals, whispered threats, and a goldsmith praying his debts don't come due. This is lending in medieval times. It sucks. But for a goldsmith, it was just another day at the bench. But here's the news you didn't want to hear. No matter how careful you are, no matter how tight you think your lock is, no matter how many prayers you mumble to Saint Eloi, your shop is a prime target. Because in medieval towns, gold means trouble. Gold means envy. And gold means danger. Welcome to the daily nightmare of a medieval goldsmith. Thieves, betrayals, and vanishing acts that could make even the hardiest journeyman rethink their career choice. First, let's talk about the thieves, and not just the common pickpockets or village cutpurses, but the real professionals. These were the folks who knew your routines better than you did. They watched when you arrived, when you closed up shop, and when your apprentices went home. They knew when you left the back door unlocked for just a second, or when you slipped out to church and left your precious metals unattended. Your gold was a beacon. It caught the eyes of every desperate soul in town. And desperation breeds creativity. Locks in 1325? A joke. They were more of a suggestion than actual security. Made of iron, often rusty, and easily jimmied with a crooked nail or a good wrench. The sturdier your door, the more obvious it was you had something worth stealing. So you either invited trouble with a creaky door or with a heavy one that screamed treasure inside. You were stuck between a rock and a hard place, or rather, between an open lock and a smash and grab. And thieves weren't just sneaky, they were brutal. There are documented cases of thieves breaking into workshops in the dead of night, smashing chests, snatching up trays of gold dust, chains, and unfinished pieces, and vanishing before dawn. You'd wake up to find your entire week's work and your livelihood gone without a trace. The law? You might as well try catching a shadow with your bare hands. Worse, some thieves had connections, powerful nobles or corrupt guards who turned a blind eye to the theft in exchange for a cut. Or worse still, the thieves might be someone you trusted. That's right, apprentices. The very boys you trained from dawn to dusk, who learned every secret of your trade, every hiding spot, and every vulnerable hour. Apprentices were notorious for sneaking off with bits of gold dust or pilfering small pieces to sell on the black market. Their betrayal was a stab that could ruin not only your bank, but your entire reputation. Because if a noble or wealthy merchant heard that their trusted goldsmith had sloppy apprentices, they might think twice before giving you business again. And the punishments for apprentices caught stealing, harsh doesn't cover it. They might be whipped, imprisoned, or worse, banished from the guild for life, essentially exiled from the trade. But that never stopped the temptation. After all, a pinch of gold dust here or a tiny ring there could be the difference between starvation and survival for a desperate lad. Then there's the matter of bad deals with nobles. Imagine this. You've crafted a delicate crown, painstakingly set with the finest gems, commissioned by a local lord eager to flaunt his power. The price is agreed upon, the payment promised upon delivery. You work for months, risking everything on one masterpiece. You deliver the goods, sweat dripping into the gold, heart pounding with hope. But the nobleman has a different plan. Sometimes they disappear, literally. You come to their castle only to find the lord gone on a sudden trip, conveniently forgetting your invoice. Maybe he claims the work is flawed or that you owe him for some other debt. Maybe his men show up at your door demanding gold you don't have. Or worse, they threaten your family if you complain. In a world without strong contracts, no consumer protection laws, or courts you could trust, goldsmiths were at the mercy of their patrons. One bad deal could mean financial ruin. Or worse, there are tales of goldsmiths disappearing after crossing the wrong noble, found days later in the river, or never found at all. And don't think that simply locking up your valuables at night saved you. If thieves couldn't get in, they'd recruit insiders, neighbors, journeymen, or disgruntled family members could be bribed or coerced into handing over keys or revealing secrets. Goldsmith workshops were so small and cramped that everyone knew everyone else's business, and every secret was a potential vulnerability. The guilds tried to keep order, but even they could only do so much. They punished members caught stealing or breaking trust with fines or expulsion. But many crimes went unreported. Fear of retaliation or losing clients meant many goldsmiths kept quiet about betrayals or thefts. One famous case from 14th century Florence tells of a goldsmith whose entire stock vanished overnight. The thief? His own journeyman, who fled with the loot and vanished into the city's underbelly. The master was left penniless and disgraced, forced to start over, or leave town entirely. Survival meant learning to hide your wealth in clever ways, secret compartments in workbenches, false bottoms in chests, even burying your gold dust beneath floorboards. But such tricks were dangerous. If discovered, they only made your workshop a target for more violent theft or accusations of hoarding. So what did you do if you caught an apprentice or thief? Sometimes a public punishment was the only deterrent left. Stocks in the town square, a whipping, or a public apology could at least warn others that your shop was not to be trifled with. But that didn't bring back stolen gold or repair a damaged reputation. In the end, being a goldsmith in medieval Europe meant walking a tightrope. Every day was a gamble between trust and betrayal, safety and loss, survival and ruin. You learned to live with the paranoia, checking your locks twice, counting your coins thrice, and never trusting the shadows that lurked just beyond your workshop door. So yes, while crafting the glittering jewels that adorned kings and queens, you also faced the grim reality that behind every sparkle was a risk, a threat of theft, betrayal, or sudden disappearance that could erase everything you'd worked for. Because in the world of medieval goldsmithing, the price of gold wasn't just measured in coins, but in fear, sweat, and the cold weight of a locked door that might not be enough. Let's get one thing straight. Nobody just walked into a goldsmith shop and helped themselves to the loot. Not without paying a price, that is. The goldsmith's treasures were tempting, sure, enough to make even the most honest passerby dream of a quick fortune. But they were also heavily guarded, locked away behind more layers than a well-dressed noble's wardrobe. You might imagine sturdy iron chests with giant padlocks. That's a start. But the reality was far more cunning. Because thieves in medieval towns were not just simple robbers. They were desperate, clever, and often armed with a wicked knowledge of how to bypass the obvious. So, goldsmiths fought fire with fire. Or rather, gold with gold. And trickery. First up, trapdoors. You wouldn't think much of a workshop floor, just rough-hewn planks, some sawdust, and a scattering of tools. But look closer. Beneath that layer of dust, the goldsmith had a secret hatch. This trap door wasn't just for storing spilled scraps or hiding a broom. No, it was the first line of defense for the precious metals. Imagine this. A customer comes in, eyes gleaming, maybe a little too eager. The goldsmith's assistant, trained from youth in the art of suspicion, watches closely. If the shop seems under threat, a quick step here, a tap there, and the trap door swings open, revealing a narrow pit filled with sharp spikes, or a deep drop, just enough to stall a thief while the master fetches help. More often than not, the trap was just a clever hiding spot, a wooden box beneath the floorboards where gold dust, coins, and tiny ingots were slipped away from prying hands. Then there were false walls, not the kind you see in spooky castles, but subtle illusions built right into the workshop walls. A false wall might be just a few inches thick, thin enough to fool a casual glance, but deep enough to hold a hidden compartment. Behind these walls, goldsmiths kept their most valuable stock. Nuggets smelted from the rarest ore, unfinished jewelry too precious to show the world yet, or emergency cash stashed away in case of sudden raids. These walls were cleverly disguised, covered in plaster, painted with the same muted colors as the rest of the shop, or hidden behind large tapestries that depicted religious scenes or family crests. Nobody would dare to touch the tapestries, lest they anger the saints or upset the noble family. And even if someone tried, the wall behind would remain a secret until the goldsmith pulled a hidden latch, usually a small, nearly invisible peg, carved to blend in with the wood grain. But that wasn't the end of it. Goldsmiths knew that keys were too easy to steal or duplicate. So many workshops used hidden safes that could only be opened with secret mechanisms, sliding panels triggered by pushing a specific tile or twisting a carved handle the right number of turns. One common trick was the rotating pillar. This pillar looked like just another piece of sturdy support in the workshop, but inside, it concealed a narrow vertical shaft where coins and gems could be dropped quickly in a crisis. Turning the pillar a quarter turn revealed a hidden drawer, just large enough to keep a stash of the most valuable goods safe from prying eyes, and even prying fingers. You might picture all this as elaborate spy movie stuff, but it was born out of brutal necessity. Guild laws required goldsmiths to store their goods securely. Failure to protect one's stock wasn't just embarrassing, it was punishable. A thief's success meant lost wages, ruined reputations, and sometimes even imprisonment if it looked like the goldsmith was negligent or complicit. The paranoia was so real that some goldsmiths even created false treasures. A chest or drawer filled with worthless scraps of lead or cheap copper disguised as gold. If thieves got inside, they might walk away with something shiny but utterly useless, like a medieval version of fool's gold. Inside the shop, the goldsmith kept a ledger, a meticulously kept book noting every transaction, every grain of gold received and spent. But this ledger wasn't left out in the open. It was often hidden behind a false panel or beneath a loose floorboard, because if the wrong eyes caught it, it could mean ruin. Forged accounts or stolen records were a goldsmith's nightmare. The guild inspectors demanded accuracy, and errors, real or fabricated, could lead to fines, loss of license, or worse. Now, imagine the workshops themselves. Many were cramped, dark, and cluttered. Space was at a premium, so goldsmiths had to get creative. Secret compartments were hidden inside workbenches, beneath drawers, even inside the wooden handles of heavy tools. A worn hammer might seem ordinary, but pry off its head, and you might find a tiny cavity perfect for hiding a ring or a small pouch of coins. Some workshops were equipped with double floors, 2 layers of wooden boards separated by a narrow crawl space where goods could be quickly moved out of sight if danger approached. These double floors made the workshops soundproof, enough to muffle the noise of hurried footsteps, whispered warnings, or the clinking of precious metals being hastily stowed. And then there were the false ceilings, low wooden panels raised just enough above the beams to create a shadowy space. Here, fragile or rare items could be slipped out of reach. Imagine having to climb a ladder in the middle of the night to retrieve a pouch of pure gold from a hidden nook only you knew about. If all that sounds exhausting, it was. Not just the craft itself, but the constant fear of betrayal or theft wore on the goldsmith. They trusted few, usually only fellow guild members, and even then, trust was cautious and conditional. This wariness extended to the tools themselves. Goldsmiths often personalized their equipment with secret markings, tiny engravings or symbols invisible to all but the trained eye. These marks identified their work and tools, preventing theft and allowing quick recognition if items were lost or stolen. Guild meetings were secretive affairs, with talk of suspected thieves, forged coins, and double-crossers whispered behind closed doors. Sometimes, guild members banded together to confront or expel dishonest craftsmen. using both social pressure and legal threats to maintain order. The cost of letting thieves run rampant was a threat to everyone's livelihood. In some towns, goldsmiths even had watchmen, trusted apprentices or hired guards who stayed overnight in the workshops, ready to ring bells or raise alarms at the first sign of trouble. These guards might not have been much better armed than the average townsperson, usually just a staff or a dagger, but the sight of a vigilant human presence was often enough to deter opportunists. But no matter how many secret compartments, hidden safes, or trap doors were installed, goldsmiths still lived on a knife's edge. A single mistake, a forgotten latch, a miscounted coin, a careless apprentice, could expose the workshop to disaster. In a time before security cameras or alarms, these physical tricks were all they had. So next time you admire a gleaming medieval ring or a delicately wrought crown, remember the unseen battles fought to keep it safe. For the medieval goldsmith, crafting beauty was only half the job. The other half was outsmarting every thief, trickster, and desperate soul who would stop at nothing to claim that beauty for themselves. And all the while, the goldsmith kept one eye on the fire, one on the scale, and one on every shadow in the room. Because in medieval times, where gold gleamed, danger lurked. You just got hired to mint coins, repair crowns, and craft royal insignias, the kind of work that turns your blood cold because one slip could cost you everything. Your head, your freedom, your future, all balanced on the edge of a tiny mistake in a tiny metal shape. Welcome to the highest stakes gig in medieval goldsmithing, where every detail mattered more than life itself. Picture this. Your workshop is no longer just a smoky, cluttered room filled with scraps and filings. It's the nerve center of power. The coins you mint will jingle in the pockets of merchants and peasants alike. The crown you repair will sit heavy on the brow of a king or a usurper. The insignia you carve? It will be stamped on documents that decide wars and peace. There's no margin for error here. None. Minting coins might sound straightforward, but it was anything but. First, the metal had to be pure, gold, silver, or bronze, depending on the realm's riches and whims. But purity was a dangerous game. Add too much base metal to stretch the precious metals, and the kingdom's economy could collapse. Minting coins wasn't just about making money. It was about keeping trust. Trust that the coin in your hand was worth something tomorrow, not just today. Your tools are rudimentary. Hammers, dies, metal stamps carved with the sovereign's face or emblem, and a furnace that must be perfectly hot. You pour molten metal into molds, then press the dies down hard to imprint the royal image. But each coin had to be identical, perfect in weight and shape. A coin too light? A sure sign of fraud. Too heavy? You're bleeding the treasury. The scales you use are finicky, your eyes strained trying to catch the faintest difference in a pile of shiny discs. And the consequences? Harsh. Minting bad coins was treason. If the crown suspected you of cheating, intentionally or by negligence, they'd throw you in the dungeon, or worse, send you to the executioner. A goldsmith executed for debasing. The coin was a grim warning to the entire trade. Repairing crowns? Now there's a nerve-wracking job. Crowns were heavy things, made of gold and encrusted with jewels. Rubies, sapphires, pearls, the kind of jewelry that made lesser men salivate and assassins take notice. The crown symbolized power and divine right. To mishandle it was to insult the king himself. Imagine sitting at your bench, hands steady but sweat dripping, as you carefully pry open a tiny clasp holding a sapphire. One false slip, and the gem shatters, or worse, falls to the floor, lost forever. The king doesn't just want a fixed crown. He demands flawless beauty, as if the crown itself could dictate his rule. And he's not the only one watching. Courtiers hover nearby, whispering rumors, ready to pin blame on you if the crown looks anything less than perfect. Then there were the insignias, tiny, intricate stamps or badges bearing the symbols of noble houses, guilds, or royal officials. These little things carried huge weight. A forged insignia could start wars, ruin reputations, or cause uprisings. You weren't just a goldsmith when you worked on them. You were a gatekeeper of order and chaos. The designs were complex, lions rampant, fleur-de-lis, crosses, crowns within crowns, and mysterious sigils only the most learned scribes could decipher. Crafting them required not only skill but secrecy. Sometimes, you had to swear an oath never to reveal the symbols to outsiders, a promise that could cost your life if broken. The pressure didn't just come from royalty. Town councils, church leaders, wealthy merchants, everyone wanted their mark made just right. The commissions piled up, deadlines loomed, and your hands ached. Gold was soft but stubborn. It could be beaten into thin sheets, but it didn't forgive scratches or dents. One tiny mistake meant starting over from scratch, wasting precious time and metal. Money wasn't always the reward either. Sometimes you were paid in promises of protection, of future work, of favors that might never come. If the noble you served fell out of favor or was executed, you could find yourself blacklisted, broke, or imprisoned on trumped-up charges of theft or treason. And then there was the ever-present fear of robbery. The workshop held gold, jewels, and coins, temptations that made it a prime target for thieves or rival guilds. Every night you had to lock your doors and hope your bolts held. Losing your tools or materials wasn't just a setback, it was ruin. You learned quickly not to trust anyone too much. Guild members could be your allies or your competitors. Some tried to sabotage others' work by slipping impurities into their metals or stealing designs. The goldsmith's world was as cutthroat as any battlefield, but the weapons were tiny hammers and knives. Despite the risks, the work was intoxicating. Holding a nearly finished crown, polished and sparkling with gemstones, made you feel like you were touching power itself. Crafting a coin that would travel across kingdoms, carried in the hands of peasants and princes alike, was humbling. You were part of history in the making. But make no mistake, the stakes were never just about pride. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and you could lose everything. Heads rolled in the shadows of court intrigues, and goldsmiths sometimes found themselves caught in deadly politics. Their craftsmanship was revered and feared. So you worked with a trembling heart and steady hands, counting each grain of gold, checking every curve and line, knowing that in this trade, perfection wasn't just the goal, it was survival. You've just been handed the commission of a lifetime, the kind that could make your career or break you utterly. The Pope's ring, the King's seal, the stuff of legend, a goldsmith's dream and nightmare all rolled into one. You're standing in a cramped, dusty workshop somewhere in a bustling medieval city, surrounded by crude wooden benches cluttered with tools that look like torture devices, tiny hammers and files that seem barely big enough to hold, and piles of raw gold nuggets so bright they almost blind you. But there's no time to marvel, because the clock is ticking. Months, maybe even a year, of painstaking work lie ahead, and one single slip could cost you everything. Let's set the scene. The Pope's ring, known officially as the fisherman's ring, was not just any ring. It was the symbol of the papacy itself, stamped with the likeness of Saint Peter Fishing, the fisher of men. This ring wasn't just decoration, it was the key to sealing official documents, a divine stamp of authority that could grant absolution, declare war, or end it. When the Pope died, the ring was ceremonially destroyed to prevent forgery. So, yeah, the stakes were high. And then there was the king's seal. It was the royal signature in solid gold and jewels. Every decree, every law, every pardon passed through this tiny, perfectly carved emblem. To ruin the seal wasn't just embarrassing. It was potentially treasonous. The king didn't take kindly to mistakes. Now, imagine being the goldsmith tasked with crafting these masterpieces. The pressure would be enough to make even the toughest artisan's hands shake. No pressure to mess up. No pressure to lose a tiny piece of gold that could never be replaced. No pressure to get every detail perfect enough that even the Pope's chamberlain couldn't spot a flaw. The workshop is dimly lit by flickering tallow candles. Dust particles float like ghosts in the air, disturbed only by your breath and the occasional clink of metal. You've spent weeks sketching, planning, ordering rare gems from distant lands, and rehearsing the countless tiny details. The fish's scales on the papal ring, the delicate fleur-de-lis on the king's seal, the perfect curve of the band. You know the whole city talks about the ring. You know courtiers, bishops, and nobility are hanging on every whispered update from your workshop. And the tools? They are ancient and unforgiving. A single misplaced hammer strike could shatter a delicate filigree. One too hot furnace blast, and your molten gold could bubble and crack. The crucible you rely on is both your best friend and your worst enemy. There's no margin for error. No undo button. Months pass in a haze of smoke and sweat. Your eyes are bloodshot from squinting at the smallest details under a candle's flicker. Your fingers are blistered and stained black from the furnace. Every night you lie awake, haunted by the thought of failing. What if the ring doesn't fit the Pope's finger? What if the seal doesn't leave a perfect impression? What if a precious gem falls out and you never notice? You become paranoid. You triple-check every measurement with scales so precise that even a single grain of gold off could cost you a fine or a public whipping. You handle every piece like it's the last thing you'll ever touch. And the fear isn't just about your reputation. It's about survival. Because if you mess up a commission for royalty or the church, it's not just your career that's at stake. Your life might be too. Medieval courts weren't known for their mercy. A botched seal could mean you fall out of favor, lose your guild membership, or worse, face accusations of theft or treason. Imprisonment, torture, or exile were very real threats. Then, there's the politics. Working for the church or royalty means dealing with intermediaries who have their own agendas. The Pope's secretary might be more interested in cutting costs than quality. The king's steward might demand bribes to speed up delivery. You learn quickly that the goldsmith's skill alone won't save you from the tangled web of favors, threats, and betrayals behind closed doors. Still, the work has moments of strange beauty. When you finally set the last jewel into the Pope's ring, the perfect deep red garnet that seems to glow in the dim candlelight, you feel a surge of pride. This isn't just a ring. It's the very symbol of divine power on earth, forged by your own hands. Or when you press the king's seal into a fresh slab of wax, watching the intricate design imprint perfectly, you realize this little emblem controls the fate of kingdoms. Your craft has shaped history. But then, reality sets in. The ring must be delivered in person to the Vatican, carried under heavy guard through narrow, rat-infested streets. The king's seal must be presented at court amid whispers of spies and assassins. One misstep, one stolen glance, and your life could unravel. The gold you've worked so hard to shape could become your shackle. The Pope's ring is ceremonially destroyed when a pontiff dies, crushed under a hammer in front of the College of Cardinals, and a new one commissioned. So every goldsmith who made one knew it was both a masterpiece and a ticking time bomb of obsolescence. For a goldsmith, this was a paradox. To be trusted with such a sacred task was the highest honor, but also the heaviest curse. You were creating something timeless, yet temporary, a symbol of eternal power, yet fleeting as a candle's flame. And your hands bore the scars of it, the burns, the cuts, the scars from tiny shards of metal embedded under your nails. Your back ached from long hours hunched over the bench. Your eyes ached from staring at gold, so bright it seared your vision. At the end of the day, you are just a man or woman holding the weight of kings and popes in your palm. Your craft is the closest thing to alchemy medieval Europe knows, turning cold metal into power, wealth, and legacy. But it's also a knife's edge. One false move, and it all comes crashing down. So as you blow out your candle, scrub your grimy hands, and prepare for another day, you might wonder, was it worth it? The endless risk, the aching body, the constant fear. Then again, when the king or the pope wears your work, who else can say they shaped history with fire and hammer? And now you're broke. Not charmingly broke, like a troubadour who writes love songs for stale bread, but dangerously, devastatingly, ruin your lineage broke. You're a medieval goldsmith, and the numbers didn't quite add up. Or maybe the market shifted. Or maybe that last commission went bad. Doesn't matter. What matters now is that your workshop's empty, your debtors are circling like crows, and the door is rattling because someone's come to take your bed. Not that it's much of a bed, just straw. Maybe some wool if you were lucky in the good years, which this isn't. You can't sleep anyway, not with the noise in your head, the sound of hammers you can't afford. Apprentices you had to send away. Customers who promised they'd pay later and then forgot you existed. You remember the day it started to unravel. You were commissioned to make a gold clasp for a bishop's vestments. Simple job, decent pay. You poured the gold, hammered it flat, carved the sacred symbols just right. Everything gleamed, everything shined, until the bishop died of a heart attack before he paid you. And now his heir, some smirking nephew with too many rings and not enough soul, claims the clasp was a gift. A gift. From you. You protested. Of course you did. Loudly. That's why you're now blacklisted from the cathedral commissions and politely told to take your services elsewhere. Elsewhere being nowhere, because Florence is a small town with a long memory and an even longer list of desperate artisans just waiting to replace you. And now? Now your landlord's knocking. He wants the rent. You offer a silver ring, one of your last pieces. He bites it to test it, declares it debased, accuses you of mixing tin. You didn't, but his cousin's a bailiff, so your argument ends with a bruise and a threat. You're allowed to stay 1 more week, then out. You used to have apprentices, 3 of them, bright-eyed and soot-stained, hammering alongside you, dreaming of masterwork commissions. They're gone now. The youngest sold his tools and went to sea. The clever one joined a merchant caravan, heading east. The third? You don't know. He vanished after your last big failure. Might be working for your rival down the alley. Might be dead. It's hard to tell in this economy. Your workshop, once the envy of your guild, now smells like mildew and despair. The forge is cold. The crucibles are cracked. You tried melting down your remaining scraps. Wedding bands no one claimed, a broken pendant, the coin you found in the gutter. You made a little something, tried to sell it in the market. But no one's buying. Not with war looming, taxes rising, and plague rumors wafting through the taverns like smoke. You hear footsteps, not the friendly kind, not the customer kind. These are heavy, armored, the kind that walk with paperwork in one hand and a cudgel in the other. Creditors. Again, they want payment. You explain you don't have it. You offer goods instead. Your chair, your copper tools, your last bar of unworked gold, thinner than a sliver of moonlight. They take it all. Then they take your ledger, too. Not for money, for information. Names of clients who still owe you. They'll lean on them next. You're down to nothing but the clothes you sleep in and the regret that clings to you like soot. But hey, at least you're not in debtor's prison yet. You wake up the next morning to the sound of shouts. It's your name, the city guard, holding a writ, signed and sealed. You've defaulted on your obligations. Time to answer to the law. You beg for time. They laugh. One of them calls you Master Goldsmith. It's not a compliment. They take you to jail. It smells like death and old soup. There are rats. You name them after your favorite tools: file, tongs, and mallet. You joke to keep the crying down, but you cry anyway, when no one's looking. Your hands, once skilled and steady, now shake from hunger. You dream of workbenches and polished cloths and the sweet, molten sheen of gold. Weeks pass, then months. No one pays your debts. No one visits. You were never rich enough to be remembered fondly, nor poor enough to be pitied. Just another craftsman who flew too close to the coins and fell into the fire. Eventually, your sentence ends. You're free, but there's no home to go back to. Your old workshop's been turned into a candle stall. Your name is mud. Your tools, sold off. Your dignity, still somewhere on the floor of that prison cell, probably being nibbled on by rats. You work now as a journeyman for someone you once trained. He doesn't thank you. He doesn't pay much. He doesn't need to. You're just another broken craftsman, hunched over a bench, filing gilded nonsense for customers who think gold comes from magic and not from sweat, debt, and despair. And when you finally die, curled in a corner, lungs full of forge dust and stomach empty of food, no one carves your name. No one remembers your rings or your reliquaries. The only thing left behind is a rumor that you once made a chalice for a pope, or maybe a duchess, or maybe no one. It doesn't matter. You're just another goldsmith who gambled with credit and lost everything. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great. We've successfully lulled you to sleep. And if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.